Welcome back, Legends. You're at Infinite Timelines. Another incredible story awaits. The school nurse who cleaned Harry's cuts was a squib. Her report reached Madame Bones by Friday. Subscribe and hit the bell. Let's dive right in. Chapter 1. The lamp on Margaret Cole's examination table had a filament issue. She had requisitioned a replacement 3 weeks ago through the school's maintenance system, which meant she had submitted a written request to Argus Filch, who had looked at it with the specific expression he reserved for requests that required him to interact with things that were not magical and therefore beneath the castle's dignity, and nothing had happened since. In the interim, she had adjusted. She kept the lamp angled 15 degrees further left than its design intended, which produced a longer throw across the table's surface, which was adequate for most purposes. On Thursday evening, October 15th, it was better than adequate. It showed her Harry Potter's forearms in the kind of detail she would not have had in the ordinary overhead light. She had been filling out the blue form. Bludger impact left forearm, the notation already half-written in her clear hand. Bruising along ulna, superficial, soft tissue swelling minor, no fracture suspected. She had pressed along the bone and he had produced no wincing, which confirmed the no fracture, and she had been about to complete the assessment with a cooling compress and a note to observe for 24 hours, which was a 12-minute process start to finish. She knew because she had timed herself once, in the 3rd year of this job, to understand the baseline. 12 minutes for a moderate bludger bruise. The timing had not changed. She turned his arm to assess the inner forearm for referred impact, because bludgers caught on the outer arm occasionally transferred stress to the flexor tendons, and the lamp caught the inner surface of his arm at the angle it had been catching everything for 3 weeks because of the filament issue, and she stopped. She did not say anything. She set his arm down on the table with the same handling she used for every arm, which was careful and impersonal, and she looked at what she had seen, and she looked at it again, and she was certain of what she was seeing because she had been looking at injuries for 20 years, and she had seen this particular configuration before, though not on a child. "Lie back," she said. He lay back. He was 12 years old and he had been in this hospital wing 11 times in 14 months, and he was very good at following examination instructions. She had noted this before. She was noting it again now in the way she noted everything, without dwelling, without inference, as a data point in an ongoing record. "Full assessment," she said. "It will take longer. Do you have somewhere to be?" "No," he said. She began at the top and worked down because that was the method. Lungs. Clear. She used the stethoscope, the Muggle stethoscope, the one she had requisitioned from a medical supply catalog 2 years ago, paid for out of her own money because the school's budget did not recognize Muggle medical equipment as a legitimate line item, which was a fact she had accepted with the equanimity she applied to most facts about how this school operated. Madame Pomfrey had looked at the stethoscope with polite confusion when she first produced it, and had never mentioned it again. The stethoscope was better than the magical auscultation charm for subtle findings, because the charm detected deviation from a magical norm, and he had no magical baseline she could calibrate against. The stethoscope just listened. Lungs clear, throat clear. She checked his lymph nodes routine and they were fine. Then she moved to his torso. She palpated his abdomen through his robes. He said nothing. She moved methodically, quadrant by quadrant, applying standard pressure, watching his face in the peripheral vision she had developed over 2 decades of watching faces while appearing to watch hands. His face was the face he wore during examinations, neutral, watchful, placed between her and whatever he was actually thinking with the precision of someone who had learned to install that particular expression deliberately. Left lower ribcage. She pressed, and he produced a flinch that was not large, not theatrical, just the involuntary compression of someone whose body had moved before his control caught up with it. "Does that hurt?" He considered the question. The considering took longer than it should. "A bit," he said. "Scale of 1 to 10. Another pause. 3, he said. She pressed again, the same location with fractionally less force. He said nothing. She noted. No secondary flinch response, controlled breathing, no guarding posture, which meant the injury was real but below the threshold where the body overrode deliberate management. She noted this with the same precision she noted the location. The pressure applied, the response produced. "Sit up," she said. He sat up. "When did you last eat?" The pause. That specific pause, the one she had been cataloging without a form for it since November of last year. The pause that was not the pause of a child who had forgotten whether he had eaten, but the pause of a child calculating what answer was safe to give. "Dinner," he said. "Earlier." "That was 4 hours ago." "I'm fine." She went to her cabinet and took out a nutrition biscuit and a glass of water from the carafe on the side table and put both on the examination table beside him. She said, "I need to check something in my records," and went to her desk and sat down and picked up the blue form and put it to one side and took out a separate piece of paper. She wrote in the notation she used for her private records, which was a compressed version of standard clinical notation modified for speed: inner forearms bilateral, volar surface, linear scarring, horizontal orientation. She paused. She was being precise. She needed to be precise because precision was the only thing that would make this legible to anyone who was not her. Cicatrix consistent with repeated contact from narrow rigid implement. Width approx. 0.5 cm. Length variable 3-7 cm. Minimum 6 per arm visible in current lighting. She paused again. Not wand burns, not spell marks. No magical residue signature, note to self. Have Abbott run residue check if possible, but visual assessment sufficient for current documentation purposes. She wrote, healing quality poor, suggests no medical treatment at time of original injury. She underlined this once, which was not something she normally did. Then age of scarring mixed, oldest 18 months minimum, possibly longer, most recent 3-6 months. She stopped writing. She read what she had written, 3 to 6 months. His second year had begun in September. He had arrived on the first of the month by train with the other students. In clothing she had noticed during the sorting feast from the staff table, because she made a practice of looking at new arrivals. His Muggle clothing had been too large. She had noted it. She had written in her private log, HJP, observed arrival, clothing inconsistent with parental provision, flagged for monitoring. The summer was June through September. The injuries in the 3 to 6 month window were summer injuries. He had not been at Hogwarts in the summer. He had been at his relative's house in Surrey, which she knew from the emergency contact form she had on file for him, which listed Aunt and Uncle, Mr. and Mrs. V. Dursley, 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. She sat with this for exactly the time it took to confirm she was certain, and then she was certain. And she put the piece of paper face down on her desk and went back to the examination table. He had eaten approximately half the biscuit. He was looking at the ceiling with the quality of attention that wasn't actually directed at the ceiling. She said, "I need you to remove your robes." He took them off. The t-shirt underneath was not his size. She registered this as confirmation of what the emergency contact form had already told her, and moved past it. "Shirt up," she said. He lifted it. She looked at his torso in the lamp's directed light. She did not allow herself to hurry the looking or to slow it into something else. She was a medical professional conducting an examination, and she was going to see what there was to see and write it down accurately and completely. The ribs, left side, 6th and 7th, the area she had palpated. In the lamp's light she could see the edge of bruising, the greenish yellow of an injury 3 to 4 weeks old, and the subtle deviation in the skin surface that meant deep tissue involvement. Not a current fracture. An old one, possibly cracked rather than broken, the kind of thing that would have hurt considerably for 2 weeks, and then settled into the dull background noise of a body managing an unaddressed injury. She pressed once more, very carefully, the way she pressed when she was assessing rather than confirming. He controlled his breathing. She noted the control. "Turn around," she said. He turned his back. Left shoulder blade. 3 diagonal marks running in the same direction, parallel, spaced approximately 2 centimeters apart. The yellow-green was similar to the ribs, 2, 3 weeks old. The width of each mark was consistent. She produced a small ruler from her coat pocket. She kept it there because it was useful, and because no one had ever remarked on it, which was the advantage of being the person in the room that no one remarked on, and measured without touching. Approximately 8 millimeters wide, regular edges, no tearing. Something flexible then, not a stick. A belt or similar. She put the ruler away. left upper arm. She turned him gently by the shoulder, and in the lamp's light she could see it clearly. 4 distinct circular marks, brownish, almost faded but not quite, approximately 1 centimeter in diameter each, arranged in the pattern of a hand gripping from above and behind. The thumb impression was on the posterior surface, index, middle, ring, little finger on the anterior. The capillary damage was consistent with significant grip pressure. She assessed the spacing, wider than her own hand would produce, an adult's hand. Left hand or a right hand approaching from behind the left side. She lowered his shirt. "Robes back on," she said. "Then sit down, I'll be back in a moment." She went to her desk and wrote for 6 minutes. When she finished, her hand had the slight ache it developed after extended writing in compressed notation. She put the paper with the first set of notes and read both together, and what she was looking at was not a single injury report. What she was looking at was a composite picture assembled from one evening's examination, and it was an unusually complete picture for a single examination, which meant she had seen something tonight that she had not seen in the same completeness on any of the previous 10 visits. And the reason she had seen it was a lamp with a filament issue that threw light at a 15-degree offset and showed texture. She thought about this. She went back to the table. "You're cleared for tomorrow," she said. "The bludger bruising is superficial. The cooling compress will handle it overnight." He was already reaching for his robes. "Good, Harry." He stopped with the quality of stopping that was bracing rather than simply pausing. "Ribs, back. Anything that hurts more than it did today, you come back." "Okay," he said, and left. She stood in the middle of the hospital wing and listened to his footsteps diminish down the corridor and through the far door. And then she stood in the silence that remained and did not think about how he had said okay in the same tone. Someone used to end a conversation rather than to agree to something. And then she went to the back room and opened the Muggle filing cabinet. She kept it locked with a padlock for which she had the only key, because the magical locking charms on the official cabinet were accessible to Pomfrey and theoretically to the headmaster's office, and she had never been comfortable with that for her private records. The Muggle padlock had never attracted comment. Most things she did with Muggle materials attracted no comment, which was one of the practical benefits of being what she was. She took out the folder labeled HJP Ongoing. She carried it to her desk and opened it. The first entry was dated November 8th last year. The Troll. She had written it up carefully. HJP First Year, presented 8 November following Troll incident, main entry corridor 2nd floor. Official incident notes. Minor trauma observation released. Private notation. Split lip, lower left. No troll-related mechanism satisfactorily accounts for split lip in location. Troll weapons are blunt and large, inconsistent with the precision injury observed. Possible, contact with stone floor, contact with another student, or pre-existing injury exacerbated during incident. Flagging for monitoring. She had filed an incident report after that. The report had gone to Professor McGonagall, who had forwarded it. She knew this because Pomfrey had mentioned it in passing, the way Pomfrey mentioned things she considered resolved, to the headmaster's office. 6 days later, a brief note had come back in the internal mail system, reviewed, no further action required. AD, 2 letters. She had put the note in the folder and written underneath it, response inadequate. Monitoring continues. December, the overheard conversation. She had been in the supply room restocking the calming drafts that third years went through at an extraordinary rate in the run-up to winter exams, and the door between the supply room and the main ward had been imperfectly shut, and Dumbledore had been speaking with someone. She had not been able to identify the second voice, in the low measured tones of a man conducting an important conversation in what he believed was a private space. She had not moved, not eavesdropping but not moving either, because she was in the middle of counting small glass vials and setting them down required generating noise, and she had learned long ago that stillness often produced more useful information than action. She had caught 3 distinct phrases. The boy doesn't know what he is. Then, better for everyone if it stays that way. And then, after a pause, the one that had stayed with her, he's better off not knowing. In a tone that had no warmth in it, and Dumbledore's tone almost always contained warmth, even performed warmth, And the absence was arresting in the specific way that a sound you expected to hear and then didn't hear was arresting. She had written it down verbatim in the folder. She did not know what it referred to. She had included it because it seemed relevant to the general picture, and she had learned that things that seemed relevant were often relevant, even when you could not immediately explain why. January, nothing of note. February, the wrist. Harry Potter had come in on a Tuesday before breakfast while she was doing inventory. He had been holding his left wrist against his chest in the way people held injuries they were minimizing rather than injuries they were about to report. And when she had examined it, she had found a sprain of the radiocarpal joint with mild ligamentous involvement. Sprain was the correct diagnosis. She had written it on the form. She had also written in the private folder underneath, mechanism queried. Potter stated, fell on stairs. Physical distribution of sprain inconsistent with forward fall mechanism. Loading pattern suggests lateral torque, possible forced rotation. She had written, cannot be confirmed, flagging only. March through May. 3 routine visits, all Quidditch-related, all consistent with stated mechanisms, all genuinely unremarkable in the specific way that made their genuineness meaningful as contrast. A comparison point. Then June, and the end-of-year incident with the Philosopher's Stone, and Potter in the hospital wing for 3 days under Pomfrey's care, which was a medical situation outside her direct responsibility, and which she had observed from the peripheral position she occupied in everything that happened in this building. She had noted the 3 days. She had noted that Dumbledore had visited for 45 minutes on the second day, and that Harry Potter had asked to see his friends almost immediately, which was the first time in her observation of him that he had voluntarily requested the presence of other people. She had not included this in the folder. She had looked at it for a long time and decided it was not the same category of information, and that including it would contaminate the record's focus. The record was a medical record. It was about his body and the things that happened to it. End of term. She had written, HJP departed 30 June. No incidents last 6 weeks. Monitoring suspended, access not possible. Note, observe arrival condition carefully in September. She had observed carefully in September. She had sat at the staff table during the sorting feast, at the far end where the students who arrived late were funneled toward the Gryffindor table, and she had looked at him. The clothes were worse. There was something about the set of his shoulders in the initial minutes of the feast, before the food appeared and the noise of the hall took over, that she had written down in the folder the following morning as, carriage on arrival suggests sustained period of restricted movement or physical tension, muscles in neck and upper back visibly contracted, releasing over approximately 20 minutes as food appeared and peers engaged. Fatigue visible. Weight possibly reduced from end-of-year observation, though lighting and seasonal clothing change make this uncertain. Weight possibly reduced. She had flagged it. She had written, monitoring resumed. And now it was October 15th and she was reading the full 14-month record from the beginning as a sequence, and the sequence was as clear as the lamp's direct light on the inner surface of his forearms. A pattern with an interruption at the school break, a consistent worsening at the summer boundary. Physical injuries that were not explained by any Hogwarts-based mechanism, and were documented in the 3 to 6 month window that corresponded exactly to the period he spent at 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. She closed the folder. She thought about Madame Pomfrey, who was a competent and caring medical practitioner and who had access to the official records, and whose name appeared on the incident reports that had gone to Dumbledore and returned with 2 letters and no action. She thought about this carefully and without animus, because animus was not the relevant framework. Pomfrey was not the problem. Pomfrey was the product of 30 years inside an institution that had taught her that certain things were managed at the appropriate level, and that the appropriate level for anything involving Albus Dumbledore was Albus Dumbledore. This was not negligence in the common sense. It was the specific institutional variety, the learned assumption that someone above you in a hierarchy had considered the situation and made a decision, and that the correct response was to trust the decision, because questioning it was uncomfortable and the institution had trained you to associate discomfort with incorrectness. She thought about Dumbledore, who had received 3 incident reports, and responded to 2 of them with the same 2 letters, and who had overheard or been told or intuited the content of her concerns at multiple points over 14 months, and who had not initiated any external review of Harry Potter's placement, and who had made the specific calculation that whatever was happening at Privet Drive was an acceptable cost. She did not know the full scope of what he believed he was managing. She knew the scope of what she had documented, and she knew the weight of it, and she had made her own calculation. She took a new piece of parchment. She did not reach for a form because there was no form for this. The relevant form, the form that should have existed, the form that would have existed in the Muggle nursing framework she was trained in, was not a Hogwarts form. It was a ministry form, or it would become one when it arrived at the ministry. She wrote to the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Ministry of Magic. She stopped. She thought about whether she was going to do this. She was a squib. She had no wand. She could not perform a single one of the spells that constituted the basis of wizarding medicine, and the qualification she held was not recognized by the Wizarding Examinations Authority, and she had been told this in various forms for 20 years, by students who made the assumption out loud when they didn't realize she was in earshot, by colleagues who phrased it carefully as of course we value your contribution, by an institutional structure that paid her a salary calibrated to someone in a support role rather than a professional one, and had never once adjusted that calibration. She had a Muggle key and a Muggle padlock and a Muggle filing cabinet and a Muggle stethoscope and 20 years of precise observation, and a locked folder with 14 months of documented evidence of a pattern of physical abuse sustained by a 12-year-old child at the hands of his legal guardians. She was going to do this. She wrote for 45 minutes. She wrote in the language of the documentation she had produced, specific, dated, measured, uninfluenced by evaluation. She described her qualifications. She described the mandatory reporting obligation under Muggle nursing law, which she considered herself bound by regardless of the Hogwarts institutional framework, because the Hogwarts institutional framework had not produced an external review, and she was going to state plainly that this was the reason she was writing directly rather than through internal channels. She described the content of the folder entry by entry, with dates and measurements and anatomical descriptions, and the distinction between what the official record contained and what the private record contained, and why the private record existed. She did not write, "I believe Harry Potter is being abused by his relatives." She wrote, "The pattern of injuries documented in the attached summary is inconsistent with Hogwarts-based accidents and is consistent in distribution, frequency, mechanism, and timing, with repeated physical injuries sustained outside of school term. And then, I draw no conclusion beyond the documented observation. I submit this report to the relevant regulatory authority for assessment." She finished. She read it back 4 pages. She changed 2 words, both in the interest of additional precision. She read it again. She made 2 copies by hand. Her handwriting was the same at the end of the copies as it was at the beginning, clear and even, because she had trained it that way. She put the first copy in the locked cabinet. She put the second copy in a plain envelope, sealed with Muggle adhesive, and wrote her name on the inside in case the chain of custody became relevant. She put the original in a second envelope and addressed it. Amelia E. Bones, Head, Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Ministry of Magic, London. She had checked the name that morning in the ministry staff directory in the common room, which was Muggle printed and updated annually. The name had been in the same position for 4 years. It was 20 past midnight. She put on her outer robes and picked up both envelopes and walked out of the hospital wing. The castle at midnight was the castle at its most itself. Stone and shadow, the particular quality of silence that was not the absence of sound, but the presence of very old walls holding everything inside them. Torches burned in their brackets and produced a light that moved. She did not find this eerie. She found it a practical reminder to watch her footing on the stairs. She walked without hurrying. Hurrying was the gait of someone with something to conceal, and she had nothing to conceal, and more importantly, she had been invisible in this castle for 20 years in the specific way that squibs were invisible in magical spaces. Present, functional, noted only when needed, and invisibility had its uses. She passed 2 portraits who were asleep and one who wasn't, and the one who wasn't opened its painted mouth, and she walked past before it could produce a sound, and nothing came of it. The owlery was cold. October in the Highlands did not negotiate. She could see her breath in the torchlight from the lower stairwell, and she breathed evenly, and it was fine, and she walked in. The owls were awake in the way owls at midnight were awake, which was completely, and several of them tracked her with the rotating head movement that she had long since ceased to find unsettling. She did not own an owl. Her personal correspondence went by Muggle post, which was reliable and left no magical trace and cost her a second-class stamp. For this, she needed the school's post birds. She selected a large tawny near the center of the roost, not the largest, which was temperamental, not the smallest, which she considered insufficiently authoritative for a ministry-addressed document, and it held out its leg with the patient indifference of a professional. She attached the addressed envelope and checked the knot. She checked it a second time. The knot held. "Ministry of Magic," she said. "Department of Magical Law Enforcement. This is priority correspondence." The owl regarded her. Then it was gone, through the high open arch, a shape for 1 second against the dark sky, and then nothing at all. She looked at the empty arch. Outside, the grounds were black and the sky was very slightly less black, and somewhere below the Quidditch pitch was invisible in the dark, which meant tomorrow's practice would be conducted in whatever the morning produced, which was Scotland's business, not hers. She turned and walked back through the castle, down 2 floors, east corridor, through the door, back to her desk. She locked the filing cabinet. She put the key inside her collar on the chain where she kept it, against her sternum where she would feel it. She opened the official log and wrote Thursday evening's entry, 15 October, H.J. Potter, 2nd year. Bludger impact left forearm, minor bruising and soft tissue swelling, no fracture. Cooling compress applied. Nutrition assessment conducted, intake below recommended, 1 standard nutrition biscuit administered. Release 23:47, ambulatory. She closed the log. She made tea on the spirit burner and drank it standing at her desk, reading the remaining copy of her report one final time, which was not uncertainty. She was not uncertain, but the professional habit of reviewing documentation before filing it, to confirm that it said precisely what she intended it to say and nothing she did not intend. It said precisely what she intended. She put it in the cabinet with the other copies, locked the cabinet and went to bed. She did not lie awake. She had done the thing that needed to be done in the way that it needed to be done, and lying awake would not improve it, and she was tired and she slept. The days between Thursday and Friday had the ordinary texture of days in a school, which resisted retrospective weight regardless of what ran underneath them. She administered a calming draft to a 3rd year who had encountered her boggart without the preparation the defense class was supposed to provide, and who arrived in the hospital wing at a low-grade vibration of distress that took 20 minutes and 2 biscuits to bring down to manageable. She replenished the Dittany stores. She read half of a journal article on the interaction between Muggle anti-inflammatory medication and minor hex residue that she had been saving for a quiet afternoon, and which was genuinely interesting, and which she flagged with a piece of Muggle adhesive tape for future reference. She updated the weekly inventory. On Friday morning, unlocking the hospital wing at 7, she found Pomfrey in the corridor. Pomfrey was a tall woman with gray hair, and the bearing of someone who had told students to stay in bed for 20 years, and had prevailed in this instruction by force of personality. She had a quality of concerned authority that Margaret had observed many times and respected without precisely liking, because liking was a different register from respect, and the two did not always coincide. "The headmaster would like to see you this afternoon," Pomfrey said. Her tone had the particular quality of someone delivering a message they had not asked to carry. 3 o'clock. "I know," Margaret said. Pomfrey's expression shifted into the territory of wanting to ask and deciding not to, which Margaret recognized as the expression that followed when people calculated that asking would make them accountable for the answer. She understood this calculation. She did not fault it. "Is there anything I should know about?" Pomfrey said. Which was the version of asking without asking, "Nothing urgent in the wing," Margaret said. "Third-year Boggart case last night fully resolved, no follow-up needed." She unlocked the door. "The Dittany restock arrived this morning and it's short by 2 vials. I'll file the complaint with the apothecary supplier." "Yes," Pomfrey said. "Right," and went. Margaret went inside and began the morning. The gargoyle at the base of the headmaster's staircase received the password from her without drama and stepped aside, and she climbed the spiral stairs at her own pace, which was steady. She arrived at 3 o'clock precisely. Because precision was a professional value she did not suspend for reasons of social theater. He was standing. She sat down across his desk without waiting for the invitation to sit, because waiting for the invitation to sit was a submission she saw no reason to perform. He sat down. The afternoon light from the peculiar window fell across the desk between them. The silver instruments on their shelves made their quiet, purposeless rotations. Somewhere in the portrait gallery along the upper wall, Phineas Nigellus Black was conspicuously awake. "Margaret," he said. The portraits were pretending to sleep. "Headmaster." He placed his hands flat on the desk. It was a gesture she had observed in him once before, during the brief overlap at a staff meeting in her first year, and which she had identified at the time as a deliberate postural choice designed to suggest openness and equivalence between the parties. She noted it now with the same neutrality she had applied then. "I appreciate you coming," he said. "I believe you may have some understanding of why I wanted to speak with you." "I imagined so," she said. He looked at her with the full attention. The warm, complete, considering attention, aimed at her in the way it was aimed at everyone, and she returned it without deflection or performance, because there was nothing in her current situation that required either. "An owl," he said, "was sent from Hogwarts on Thursday night, to the Ministry, to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement." She said nothing. "I don't monitor my staff's personal correspondence," he said. "I want to be clear about that. But the Ministry contacted the Board of Governors this morning, and the Board contacted me, and the nature of the communication made certain things apparent." He paused. "I would like to understand what you have shared, and I would like to discuss it with you directly. I believe if we speak candidly, we may find that some of your concerns—" "I don't have concerns," she said. He stopped. "I have a 14-month medical record," she said, "documenting injuries to a specific student that are inconsistent with Hogwarts-based incidents and inconsistent with accidental injury. I sent that record to the relevant regulatory authority because the internal reporting process did not produce external review. I don't have concerns, I have documentation." The room was very quiet. Phineas Nigellus made a sound behind his painted frame. Nobody looked at him. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment that had a different quality from his usual pauses, which were deployed as rhetorical tools. This pause was not a tool. This was a man who had expected something other than what he was receiving and was adjusting. "May I ask," he said, and his voice had not changed in its surface quality, though behind his eyes something had shifted from warmth to the undisguised clarity of calculation, "whether you consulted with Poppy before sending this?" "No." "Or with myself?" "No." "Or with the deputy headmistress?" "No." He unclasped his hands and placed them in his lap. "I see," he said. She said, "I am a licensed Muggle medical practitioner. I hold a full nursing qualification from the Royal College of Nursing, validated in 1974. My Squib status precluded wizarding medical qualifications. I have practiced within my Muggle qualifications for 20 years. Under both Muggle nursing law and the general wizarding welfare framework codified in the 1989 Family Magical Protection Act, I have a mandatory reporting obligation when I observe evidence consistent with child abuse. I fulfilled that obligation on Thursday night." She said abuse clearly and without preamble, and the words sat between them in the space above the desk, and he did not look away from it, which she credited him for, because some people looked away. "I know what Harry experiences at his relative's house," he said, quietly. The way someone said a thing they had been carrying for a long time and had not said aloud before. "I know you do," she said. "You may not understand the full." "I understand," she said. that a 12-year-old came into this hospital wing on Thursday night with healing belt marks on his back, grip injuries on his upper arm consistent with an adult's left hand, and linear scarring on both forearms showing multiple incidents of injury sustained without medical treatment. I understand that these injuries were sustained outside this school, and that the pattern has been consistent across 2 summer breaks. I understand that you are aware of his living situation and have not initiated any external review of it. That is the specific situation I reported. Dumbledore was very still. She was also very still because she was always very still under pressure, and because stillness was not a posture she performed but a quality she had developed over 20 years of working in a medical space where performance of any kind consumed resources she needed for accuracy. The protections on the house, he said, and now his voice had the quality she recognized from behind the supply room door, the tone that had no warmth in it, the tone of a man who was not performing for anyone. They protect Harry's life, blood magic, bound to his mother's sacrifice, anchored to his mother's blood. Without them, without that specific address, the protection dissolves. And without it, Tom, he paused. Without it, Harry is accessible to a threat that makes whatever occurs at Privet Drive look like a minor inconvenience. I'm not a legal authority, she said. I'm not a welfare officer. I'm not an Auror. I sent a report containing documented medical observations to the department responsible for assessing them. What happens next isn't my decision to make. That is specifically the point of sending the report. The blood magic is a matter for the Department of Magical Law Enforcement to evaluate, she said. If there is a legitimate magical protection consideration that affects Harry Potter's placement, then the department has the resources to assess it and the authority to weigh it against welfare obligations. I don't have those resources. I have a stethoscope in a filing cabinet. She stopped. Headmaster. I have been in this school for 20 years. I have filed 3 incident reports regarding this student over the past 14 months. 2 were returned to me with a notation that they had been reviewed at your level and required no further action. 1 was not acknowledged. I did not send this report to the ministry because I have a grievance against you or against this school. I sent it because the internal process did not work and this child is 12 years old, and the injuries I documented on Thursday night are not acceptable under any professional standard I hold myself to. He was looking at the desk. She let the silence be. Do you have copies? He said. Yes, she said. Something crossed his face then, a quality she had not seen there in the 4 previous interactions she had had with him, and had not seen from a distance across 20 years of staff meetings and corridors. The specific expression of a man discovering that a boundary he believed he controlled had already been crossed, not by force, but by the simple fact of another person having been more careful than he anticipated. It was not anger. It was something more fundamental than anger. It was recalibration. She watched it happen in the 2 seconds before he reassembled his expression and felt, not satisfaction, but the quiet recognition that she had been accurate in her assessment of his institutional habits. Then we will see what the ministry makes of it, he said. Yes, she said. We will, she stood. He said, Margaret. She was already at the door. I do want what is best for him, he said. I need you to know that. She stood with one hand on the frame and looked at the spiral stairs below and considered the statement with the same attention she gave everything, and she believed it was true in the precise way that made it insufficient. A man who wanted what was best for Harry Potter, and who had the power to ensure external review of his living situation, and had not initiated that review, was a man who wanted what he had decided was best, which was not the same thing, and she was not going to tell him that because the conversation was finished, and what she needed from him was not agreement but compliance with the process that was now in motion. Good night, headmaster, she said, and went down the stairs without hurrying, along the corridor, back to the hospital wing, where the lamp on the examination table was still throwing its slightly off-angle light across the surface, because the filament was still faulty, because she had not received the replacement. She sat down at her desk. She pulled out the inventory list. She wrote, Dittany, short 2 vials, complaint filed. Lamp filament, examination table, replacement outstanding, reminder to be sent Monday. She filed it. She made tea. She drank it. Chapter 2. The hearing Amelia Bones read the report at 6:42 on Friday morning, before her tea went cold. Scrimgeour had left it on her desk. He arrived earlier than her, 40 minutes earlier precisely, which was a habit she had tracked for 2 years and which served his interests more than hers, though she had never said so because the informational advantage he accumulated in those 40 minutes was occasionally useful to her in the way that a subordinate's ambition was occasionally useful, provided you kept it calibrated. He had attached a note in his cramped, purposeful hand, Hogwarts Post Bird, unusual provenance, unopened. She had opened it, 4 pages. The handwriting was clear and unvarying from the first line to the last, which meant it had been written by someone who did not become less precise under pressure or who had copied it out deliberately after the fact. She suspected the latter and noted it as a mark in the writer's favor. The Ministry's false morning light simulated 7 a.m., the same yellow-white regardless of season, a detail she had always found faintly depressing, fell across the parchment in flat columns, and she read it without pausing. Then she read it again. On the second pass, she was not reading for content. She was reading for what the writer had chosen not to include. No evaluative language, no explicit allegation. No statement of what the writer believed or felt or feared. What the writer had produced was a chronological medical record annotated with professional qualifications and a precise explanation of why internal reporting had been exhausted, and it stopped at the observation line with the deliberateness of someone who knew exactly where that line was and had drawn it there on purpose. The conclusion, the obvious, unavoidable conclusion that anyone reading 4 pages of this would reach independently, had been left entirely to the reader. That was a technique. It was a sophisticated one, and it required both legal awareness and considerable self-discipline to execute, and the writer had executed it cleanly. She turned to the cover note. Squib Medical Staff, Hogwarts. She sat with this. A squib meant no diagnostic charms, no magical medical qualifications, no wand-based verification of the injuries described. The Muggle nursing credential listed Royal College of Nursing, validated 1974, which she noted was 22 years of active practice, was a real qualification with a real standard of care. She had worked alongside Muggle law enforcement on 3 cross-jurisdictional cases in her 9 years heading the DMLE. She understood what mandatory reporter meant. She understood what it meant that a mandatory reporter had assessed the internal institutional process as exhausted. She put the report down. She looked at the ceiling for 8 seconds. This was not deliberation. She had already made the decision, had made it somewhere in the second paragraph of the first page. But a pause she permitted herself before moving, because moving quickly after reading something like this sometimes produced actions that were right in principle and wrong in execution, and she preferred to be right in both. H.J. Potter. She was going to be honest with herself about the name, because dishonesty here would metastasize into every subsequent decision. The name was a complicating factor, not because it changed the content of the report. The report would have been identical if the student had been any other second year at Hogwarts, and her obligation would have been identical. But because an investigation touching Harry Potter and Albus Dumbledore simultaneously would generate institutional pressure of a specific magnitude, and she needed to account for that pressure without letting it govern her. There was a difference between accounting for political reality and being governed by it. She had spent 9 years maintaining that difference under conditions considerably less clear-cut than this. She was also going to be honest about this. She wanted the case. Not in the way that was unseemly. She was not going to pretend the distinction didn't matter. She wanted it because it was a clean legal question about DMLE jurisdiction over a Hogwarts-enrolled student that had never been properly tested in a formal hearing, and because Dumbledore's unilateral authority over matters inside Hogwarts had operated without external review for so long that the institution had ceased to question whether external review was warranted. She was going to want that question answered regardless of who the child was. The fact that the child was Harry Potter made the question more visible, which was useful rather than obstructive, provided she managed the visibility carefully. She picked up her quill and tapped it twice against the desk edge, not nervousness, a counting mechanism, the beat against which she ordered her thoughts and stood. She went to the door. The aide at the outer desk was already upright. "Get me Scrimgeour. Get me Diggory from Welfare Liaison Josephine Diggory, not her husband. Get me a court-certified healer available this afternoon, someone without existing Hogwarts connections. Check the registration rolls. And find me the legal protocol for ministry-initiated welfare inquiry into a currently enrolled Hogwarts student." The aide said, "Does that protocol?" "It exists," she said. "It's in the 1989 Family Magical Protection Act, Section 14, Subsection 3. It was never invoked. Find it anyway and have it on my desk in 30 minutes." She went back to her desk and wrote the letter to the Board of Governors. Scrimgeour arrived at 7:15. He was a lean, angular man who wore his ambition the way some people wore good robes, visibly and without apology, and who was, despite this, an excellent deputy because his ambition ran parallel to institutional effectiveness rather than across it. She had assessed this early and had been correct. He sat down across from her without asking, which was a habit she had accommodated years ago. She gave him the report without preamble. He read it in 4 minutes, which was faster than her and meant he had read it once for content and not gone back. "Potter," he said. "Yes, Dumbledore, by implication. The board is going to. I've written to the board," she said. "They'll respond by mid-morning. Malfoy will object, and I'll note the objection." Scrimgeour put the report down with the particular care of someone handling something they recognized as significant. "What's the blood magic question?" She had been expecting this. "I don't know enough to assess it. I've contacted the Unspeakables. They won't move fast. I've given them the legal timeline. The inquiry opens today regardless. If the blood protection is a genuine countervailing factor, the tribunal weighs it. That's what tribunals are for." She tapped her quill twice. "What I need from you today is the Hogwarts staff records. Specifically, anyone who's filed incident reports relating to Potter in the last 14 months. I want to know what went in and what came back." Scrimgeour said, "You think there are others? I think a school with 500 students and a full medical staff has a paper trail that either confirms this pattern or contradicts it, and I need to know which before I walk into that castle." He stood. "I'll have it by noon." 10, she said. He almost smiled in the way he did when she compressed his timelines, which she interpreted as the expression of someone who found being pushed useful and resented the fact that he found it useful. He went. She wrote 2 more letters. One to the duty Wisengamot clerk, formally notifying the opening of a welfare inquiry under Section 14 of the Family Magical Protection Act, which created the paper trail the inquiry would need to have existed from the start. One to the Hogwarts Board of Governors, formally requesting cooperation under the school's operating charter, which required board cooperation with ministry welfare inquiries as a condition of license. She worded both with the precision she used for all formal correspondence, which was the precision of someone who knew that correspondence became evidence. The board's response arrived at 10:30. Lucius Malfoy's signature, which she had anticipated, in the heavy black ink he favored, which she had also anticipated. She read it standing because it did not warrant sitting down. He used the word premature 4 times. He suggested the ministry might benefit from direct consultation with Headmaster Dumbledore before pursuing avenues that may prove unnecessarily disruptive to Hogwarts' outstanding reputation for student welfare. He did not invoke the governor's formal authority to restrict ministry access to Hogwarts. She noted the absence of this invocation. He had not invoked it because he had read the charter and knew it would not hold against a Section 14 inquiry, and he was therefore on record as having objected without having exposed himself to the legal liability of an obstruction claim. This was very competent political positioning. She noted this too, not admiringly, but accurately, because accurate assessment of an opponent's competence was functionally necessary. She filed the letter, wrote noted, no action required on the response line, and moved on. Dumbledore's letter arrived 11 minutes later. She saw his handwriting on the envelope and opened it before she sat down. "Dear Amelia." She read this twice, because the choice to use her first name when they had met formally twice and never socially was its own piece of information. designed to perform intimacy and diminish the formality of the proceedings before they began. She did not object to it. She simply noted it as a technique and read past it. He offered cooperation. Framed it first, precisely and convincingly, which was more disarming than if he had framed it clumsily. He introduced material context. The phrase did specific work, suggesting classified information rather than excuse-making. He requested a meeting in person, in confidence, at her earliest convenience. In person, in confidence at Hogwarts, which would be in his space on his timeline without a formal record. She took out a fresh piece of parchment and wrote, Albus. I will be at Hogwarts today at 3 o'clock. Please ensure H.J. Potter is available for a welfare interview at 4, to be conducted by Ministry Welfare Liaison J. Diggory. Please also ensure the staff member who maintains the student medical log is present at 3. Thank you for your cooperation. She did not close it warmly. She did not close it at all. She signed it with her name and title and sent it. Then she called Diggory. Josephine Diggory was a compact woman in her late 40s who wore plain robes and had the particular quality of unhurried attention that Margaret Cole's report had also demonstrated, which Bones considered a professional hallmark rather than a personality trait, the mark of someone who had learned that rushing produced different information than waiting. She had been in welfare liaison for 15 years. Her record was exemplary in the specific way that records were exemplary when the person holding them was good at their job and uninterested in visibility. Bones briefed her in 12 minutes, which was sufficient. Diggory read the report, asked 2 questions, the age of the student, and whether there was a known magical protection consideration affecting placement, and nodded at the answers to both. I'll need him in a private room, Diggory said. Not the headmaster's office, not the hospital wing proper, a side room. Neutral furniture, 2 chairs of equal size, no desk between us. I'll ensure it, and I'll need 30 to 40 minutes without interruption. You'll have it. Diggory folded the report and handed it back. The Squib nurse, she said. Yes. She's been watching him for 14 months. Yes. Diggory was quiet for a moment. Who watches the Squib? She said. It was not a rhetorical question. It had the inflection of something she was thinking through aloud, and Bones did not answer it because there was no answer that wasn't the answer, which was nobody, and they both knew it. 3 o'clock, Bones said. Bring your standard welfare kit. Diggory picked up her bag. I always do, she said, and left. They arrived at Hogwarts at 2:45. Bones, Diggory, and Healer Abbott, who was a quiet man in his 60s with court certification in both adult and child physical assessment, and who had worked with the DMLE on 11 previous occasions and communicated primarily through the considered placement of his medical bag. Bones trusted his competence and his paperwork. That was sufficient. The castle arrived from the grounds the way it always arrived, which was all at once, the full weight of its scale becoming apparent when you were close enough for the perspective to shift. She had been inside it 3 times, twice for formal board consultations, and once during a brief inquiry into a potions accident in 1990. Each time it had produced the same effect, which was the architectural equivalent of being told that the building had opinions. Dumbledore was in the entrance hall. Dark blue robes composed, the full presentation of himself that she had seen in public contexts, and which was, she acknowledged, genuinely impressive in the way that only authentically inhabited public personas were impressive. The warmth was real, or whatever it was that functioned as warmth in a man who had been performing warmth for so long it had become indistinguishable from the real thing. The control underneath it was also real. He extended his hand and said, Amelia, with the warmth dialed to a level calibrated for a colleague rather than an adversary. She shook it. Thank you for making time. He looked at her team with the attentive courtesy of a host assessing guests. He looked at Diggory, then Abbott, then back at Bones. If you and I might speak privately first. Let's go up together, she said. We're working to the same timeline. Half a second, almost invisible. Of course, his office. She had read the descriptions, and the descriptions were accurate, which was not always the case with famous spaces. The portraits, the instruments, the pensive under its cloth. The tea tray on the desk, which was either genuine hospitality or set design, and which she decided was probably both simultaneously, because he was not a man who separated the genuine from the strategic. The woman in the chair across from the desk was not Madame Pomfrey. She was perhaps 50, in nurse's robes, with gray-streaked dark hair and the quality of stillness that Bones had now seen in two people in the same week, which suggested it was a professional attribute rather than a personal one. No healer insignia. No wand at her hip, no wand at all. She was looking at the room with the inventory gaze of someone cataloging it. She looked at Bones. Bones said, "You wrote the report." "Yes," said Margaret Cole. "Good." Bones sat down. She looked at Dumbledore. "Shall we begin?" He was, as she had prepared herself for him to be, very good. He did not deny. She had run the scenarios that mourning and denial had been the most tactically weak option available to him, and he was not tactically weak. He did not minimize. He did not perform ignorance of the injuries, which would have been insulting to everyone in the room and which he knew she would see through. What he did was build a case for necessity, and he built it with the intelligence and structural precision of a man who had been building arguments for 60 years. Blood magic, he said. Lily Potter's sacrifice, the specific mechanism of it, the way love given completely in the moment of death had produced a protection that could not be replicated by any other means and could not be transferred to any other anchor. The blood connection to Petunia Dursley was not a bureaucratic coincidence. It was the specific condition under which the protection held. Without that address, without Harry calling it home in the genuine functional sense, the protection failed. And the protection was the one barrier standing between Harry Potter and a dark wizard, who had, last year, demonstrated his continued presence by operating from inside this castle in a host body. He said Tom rather than you-know-who or he who must not be named, and she noted the casual courage of this because it mattered to the overall calibration of the man. He was not performing carelessness. He had long since passed the point where the name required performance to say. He said all of this without hurrying, without the defensive acceleration that indicated a weak argument, and she listened to it carefully because it might be true, and because she needed to understand it fully whether it was true or not. When he finished, she let a short silence settle. Then she said, "So you knowingly placed a child in a household where he sustained repeated physical injury because you assessed the alternative risk as greater." He met this directly. "I assessed the probability that Harry would be killed without that protection as significantly greater than the risk of harm at the Dursleys." "Yes." "You knew what the household was." "I knew the family was not warm." He paused, and it was a genuine pause, not a rhetorical one. "I did not know the extent of what Margaret has documented. I want to be clear about that." "You didn't know," Bones said. "No. Your medical staff knew." A beat. He looked at Cole and she looked back at him with the gray, undeflecting gaze, and he looked at Bones. "Margaret's records came to my attention this morning, after the board's contact," Bones said. "She filed 3 incident reports over 14 months. 2 were returned with notations indicating review at your level. 1 was not acknowledged. At what level did you review the 2 that were returned?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment that had texture. "I reviewed them in the context of the general pattern of incidents at Hogwarts," he said. "I assessed the injuries reported as consistent with the school environment." "The injuries she reported in the private log," Bones said, "are specifically inconsistent with the school environment. Their timing, distribution, and mechanism place them outside of term." She let that sit. "Did your review account for the summer window?" he said. "No." "Why not?" "Because the reports I received were flagged as Hogwarts incidents. I reviewed them as such." "Ms. Cole," Bones said without turning. "The reports you filed. How did you flag them?" Cole said. "I flagged the November report as a miscellaneous injury following a school incident with a notation querying the mechanism. I flagged the February report as a possible sprain with a notation of inconsistent mechanism. I flagged a 3rd report in April as a pattern concern." "The word pattern appeared in an official incident report," Bones said to Dumbledore. He said, "The April report was reviewed by the deputy headmistress, who indicated she would discuss it with me." "I do not believe that discussion took place." "You don't believe it took place. I have no record of it." Bones tapped her quill against the arm of the chair. Once, twice. She was watching his face, which was very good, and watching the gap between what the face was doing and what the face was not doing, which was where the actual information lived. The blood protection, she said. I want it in writing, certified by an unspeakable. The mechanism, the specific conditions, the consequence of removal from the anchor address. If the protection is what you say it is, it constitutes a potentially significant legal factor for the welfare tribunal to consider. The tribunal, he said. The inquiry is formally opened. The tribunal will determine placement. I don't make that determination, you know how the process works. I know how the process works, he said. He said it without bitterness and without deflection, which meant he had accepted the loss of procedural control while retaining, she suspected, a clear view of where he could still apply pressure. The petition for the tribunal to consider magical security factors is legitimate and should be filed, she said. Through your solicitor to the tribunal clerk before the preliminary hearing, I'll expedite the unspeakable certification. If the protection is what you say, the tribunal will weigh it. She stood. I need my welfare officer to see Harry now. Can you provide a private room in the hospital wing? He rose. Of course, he said. For the first time in the meeting, she heard the age in his voice, not the dignified, deliberate age he carried like an attribute, but something underneath it, the age that was simply accumulated and sometimes showed. Amelia, I want you to know that I have never been indifferent to Harry's welfare. She picked up her bag. She looked at him directly. I know you haven't, she said. That's not the question the tribunal will be asking. She left Diggory to collect Harry from the corridor. McGonagall had been briefed to have him waiting, because Bones had put this in her preparatory letter, and McGonagall was the kind of deputy headmistress who executed instructions she'd been given without requiring them to be explained twice, and stood outside in the corridor with Margaret Cole. The corridor outside the hospital wing smelled of stone, and the faint, particular sharp smell of potions that had been simmering for a long time. It was quiet. Through the heavy door she could hear nothing from inside, which was either because Diggory was not yet started or because she was very good at creating a sealed conversational space, and Bones suspected both. How long have you had the private file? She said. 14 months, Cole said. I started it in November of last year. What started it? A split lip after the troll incident. The mechanism was inconsistent. Cole's voice was the same in the corridor as it had been in the headmaster's office. Level, specific, unornamented. I had already been watching him since arrival. The clothing, the weight, the way he sat during examinations. She paused. The way he held still, Bones said. When did you decide to send the report? Thursday night, October 15th. What changed? Cole looked at the closed door for a moment. The injuries from this past summer were more extensive than previous years. I had been building the file for 14 months, and I had been watching to see whether the internal process would eventually produce an external response. She stopped. It hadn't. And the scarring I saw Thursday, the pattern and extent of it, that was the difference between a concerning accumulation and a conclusive one. I was certain. Bones said, the private log, I'll need a certified copy for the tribunal file. I made 2 copies before I came to see the headmaster last night, Cole said. One is in my cabinet. I'll send one to you this evening by ministry post. Bones looked at her. You made the copies before the meeting with Dumbledore. Yes, you anticipated he would ask about them. He did ask, Cole said. Yes. Bones stood with this for a moment. She was thinking about the shape of what Cole had done, the structure of it, not the moral shape which was clear enough, but the practical shape, the series of decisions that had produced a 4-page document that was, from a legal standpoint, one of the cleaner pieces of originating evidence she had received in 9 years. The decision to maintain parallel records, the decision to use Muggle adhesive rather than wax on the envelope, the decision to use a postbird rather than a registered magical mail service, which would have logged the sender. The decision to copy everything before walking into the meeting that she knew was coming. None of these decisions were obvious. All of them were correct. I'll need your formal testimony to the tribunal, Bones said. It will take a full day, possibly 2. You'll be cross-examined. Dumbledore's solicitor will attempt to establish personal grievance or institutional bias as a motive for the parallel record-keeping. I know, Cole said, they'll be thorough. So will I, Cole said. I have parallel records on 12 students over 20 years. The other 11 are accidental injuries, resolved and archived, with no pattern inconsistencies. I can produce all of them. She looked at Bones with the gray gaze that had been taking inventory since she walked through the headmaster's door. I'm not difficult to defend, Bones said. The Squib status, someone will raise it as a qualification question. Let them, Cole said. My Muggle nursing qualification is held to a higher evidentiary standard for clinical observation than standard diagnostic charm results, because Muggle medical documentation requires physical measurement and written notation rather than a charm result that can be misread or rerun. Everything in my log has a measurement attached to it. She stopped. I'm aware of the irony. Bones was quiet for a moment. She said, for what it's worth, the documentation the construction of it is well done. Cole said, it's my job. It's above your job. Then it should be part of my job, Cole said. The flatness in this last sentence had a quality that Bones recognized as the particular compression of a very long grievance that had been reduced to its most precise form and was being offered, without drama, as a statement of fact. There was nothing adequate to say in response to it. Bones knew this and did not reach for something adequate. She said, Diggory is the best welfare interviewer I have. If there's anything to get from that interview, she'll get it. He'll say it's fine, Cole said. Bones looked at her. Whatever she asks him about the summer, Cole said. He'll say it's fine. He says it's fine to everything. It's the only answer he has for questions he doesn't want to answer, and I've watched him use it for 14 months. She was looking at the closed door. It doesn't mean she won't be able to use it. It just means she'll have to know what she's listening for. Bones said, Diggory knows what she's listening for, Cole said. Good. Diggory took 41 minutes. Bones spent the time in the corridor reviewing the unspeakable contact protocol she had drafted that morning, going through it for any procedural gap that Dumbledore's solicitor could exploit, finding two and correcting them on the parchment in her neat, close hand. She heard nothing from behind the closed door. The castle around her made its castle sounds, water in pipes, wind in the external wall, the distant blur of students somewhere 3 floors above. When Diggory came out, her face was professionally composed, which was what Diggory's face always was after a welfare interview. She sealed her notes into the standard welfare envelope before she said anything. Then she said quietly, cooperative, consistent, short answers, no volunteering. And I asked him 6 questions about the summer. He said it's fine 4 times. He said okay once and I don't know once. The I don't know was in response to whether he had spoken to anyone at his relative's house about how he was feeling, which is not a question that gets, I don't know, unless the child has never been asked before and doesn't know how to process the premise. Bones absorbed this. He was looking at the floor on the 4th. It's fine, Diggory said. His voice didn't change. That's what I'm writing up, the absence of change. She paused. He asked me at the end whether he was in trouble. Bones said, what did you tell him? I told him that I was there to make sure he was looked after and that he wasn't in trouble. He said okay. He left. Diggory looked at the envelope in her hands. He held himself like someone who expects the exit to be blocked. Even when it wasn't. She went to find a desk to write at. Bones stood in the corridor and looked at the closed door of the room that was now empty and thought about a 12-year-old who had answered welfare questions with its fine 4 times running, in a voice with no change in it, and who had been surprised when the door remained open. Then she went to find the hospital wing. Cole was at the supply cabinet, her back to the door, restocking with the systematic efficiency of someone who kept identical inventory in identical order every week and could have done it in the dark. The cabinet was open, and the light inside it fell on rows of identical small bottles, each labeled in the same clear hand. Bones said, I'll have the formal inquiry paperwork to you by tomorrow. You'll be listed as originating reporter, anonymously in the official record, your name in the internal file under chain of evidence. Anonymous is fine, Cole said, not turning. I didn't send the report to be named. Bones considered what to say to this and arrived, for the second time, at the conclusion that there was nothing that sat at the correct level. The gap between what Cole had done and what the institution would ever formally acknowledge she had done was the kind of gap that didn't close. She was going to tell her anyway, because withholding it served no one. "For what it's worth," Bones said, "I've received originating reports for 14 years. What you sent me is among the best constructed I've seen." Cole placed a jar of Dittany on its shelf and said, "It's my job." "You've said that. It keeps being true." Bones picked up her bag. She said, "The inquiry will take 4 to 6 weeks. Dumbledore has legal resources and he'll deploy them effectively. Don't underestimate how well he'll argue the blood protection question." "I'm not underestimating him," Cole said. "I've watched him manage this school for 20 years. "The outcome isn't guaranteed," Bones said. "I need you to understand that. If the blood protection argument holds, if the unspeakables certify what he's claiming, the tribunal may determine that the magical security interest outweighs the welfare concern. I don't know if that will happen. I don't know enough about the magic, but I won't tell you the case is won because it isn't one yet." Cole turned then. She looked at Bones with the gray inventory gaze that had been applying the same attention to everything all afternoon. "I know the case isn't one," she said. "I sent the report because sending the report was the correct action. Whether it succeeds is a separate question. Both of those things are true at the same time." Bones looked at her. "The report exists now," Cole said. "The record is in the ministry's file. Whatever the tribunal decides, the documentation of what happened to that child in that house is formally part of the official record of his welfare. It cannot be resolved at the headmaster level and returned to me with 2 letters. She turned back to the cabinet. "That is what I wanted. That is what I have." Bones stood with this for a moment. Then she said, "I'll contact you when the preliminary hearing date is set," and went. Back at the ministry by 6. She wrote for 2 hours. The formal inquiry opening. Case number 1992 W114. Originating documentation received 16 October. Source confirmed Hogwarts staff. Preliminary legal framework established under Section 14 of the Family Magical Protection Act. Welfare interview conducted same day. Medical assessment by Healer Abbott pending receipt of independent physical examination order. The letter to the unspeakables, requesting certified assessment of blood magical protection under the registered case number, with a deadline she knew was aggressive and intended it to be. The formal notification to the Wisengamot duty clerk that an inquiry had been opened. The preliminary hearing request. Scrimgeour knocked at 8 and entered without waiting. He sat down. He had the look of someone who had been working without a break since 7 a.m. and was not going to say so. "The prophet is going to get this," he said. "Yes. Malfoy will brief someone. He might wait a week to see how the inquiry develops, but he'll brief someone. I know. Do you want to put anything on the record proactively? A brief statement about the inquiry's scope?" She put her quill down. "No. I want the tribunal's findings to be the first thing on the record publicly. If Malfoy leaks, I respond to his leak with the tribunal findings, not with a preemptive statement that he can frame as defensive." Scrimgeour tilted his head slightly, which was his gesture of partial agreement. "And Dumbledore? He'll comply with the process. He told me he would cooperate, and he meant it, within the limits of what he considers cooperation, which will be full compliance with mandatory procedure and vigorous advocacy for his position at the tribunal." "That's legitimate." She tapped her quill. "The blood protection argument might be sound. I want you to understand that as a genuine possibility. If the unspeakables certify it, the tribunal is going to have a real conflict to resolve, and I'm not going to tell you I know how they'll resolve it." "What do you think they'll do?" She considered this. "I think the certified documentation of repeated physical abuse creates a legal presumption against the placement that is very difficult to overcome. I think the blood protection argument, if certifiable, is the most serious countervailing claim that could be made. I think the tribunal is going to be asked to weigh a child's safety against a child's survival, and I don't envy them." She paused. "I also think the framing of those two things as opposites is partly Dumbledore's framing and partly accurate, and that the tribunal will need to determine which," Scrimgeour said. "And if they get it wrong?" "Then we appeal," she said. "That's the system. It's imperfect and it's what we have." She picked up her quill. "Go home, Rufus. We have a preliminary hearing to prepare." He stood. At the door he stopped. "The nurse," he said. "The squib," Cole, Bones said. "She knew this would end up in a tribunal." "Yes, and she sent it anyway." "Yes," Bones said. Scrimgeour stood in the doorway with the expression of someone working through a fact that did not fit neatly into his existing categories. Then he left. The inquiry took 7 weeks. It was not clean, and it was not quick, and it did not proceed in the straightforward manner that a clear report and clear documentation might have suggested, because clear documentation had never been the limiting factor in any proceeding that touched Albus Dumbledore's sphere of influence. The limiting factor was always everything else. The Unspeakables produced their assessment in week 3. It ran to 19 pages and was certified by 2 senior specialists, and confirmed the blood protection mechanism in its essential points while noting, in measured, unspeakable language, that the precise extent of the protection's vulnerability under various conditions of partial anchor was currently a matter of theoretical debate within the relevant research community. This was, Bones thought, the most carefully hedged way of saying we think he's probably right, but we aren't certain that she had encountered in 9 years of reading ministry documents. Dumbledore's solicitor, a meticulous, gray-haired witch named Clearwater who had been practicing magical law since before Bones was born, and who had a reputation for turning procedural precision into an art form, filed a petition requesting that the tribunal formally weigh the blood protection against the welfare findings. Bones's legal team filed a counter-petition arguing that the protection, whatever its validity, did not constitute a defense to documented abuse and could be addressed through alternative protective measures. The tribunal accepted both petitions. Malfoy did not leak to the prophet. He did something she had not anticipated, which meant she had underestimated him at one specific point, which she noted and filed away as a calibration error. He petitioned the Wisengamot directly on behalf of the Board of Governors, not to stop the inquiry, but to have its scope formally limited to welfare matters, explicitly excluding any finding that could constitute a formal reprimand of the headmaster. This was clever in the specific way that Malfoy's cleverness was always clever, which was that it appeared defensive while being offensive. He was not protecting Dumbledore. He was pre-limiting the tribunal's authority before the tribunal had a chance to define its own scope. Her legal team spent 4 days countering it. They succeeded. The tribunal retained full scope. She absorbed the 4 days as the cost of having underestimated the move. Cole testified in week 3 on a Tuesday. Courtroom 6 in the ministry was a room designed to produce a specific atmospheric effect, which was the effect of considerable institutional weight bearing down on whoever occupied the witness position. Stone walls, tiered seating for the tribunal members, the dock angled so that the witness faced the panel with their back to the public gallery, which meant facing authority with observers behind you, which most people found destabilizing. Cole sat in the witness position and answered questions in the same level, specific, undramatic language she had used in everything else, and Bones watched from the prosecution bench and thought about 20 years of institutional invisibility producing, as its direct result, a witness who was essentially unimpeachable, because an invisible person left a paper trail that was pure documentation and nothing else. Clearwater cross-examined for 2 hours. She was rigorous and precise, and she tried 4 distinct angles. Qualification challenge, which Cole answered by producing her Royal College certification and 20 years of continued professional development records. Personal grievance, which Cole answered by producing the 11 other parallel student records with their complete absence of pattern findings. Institutional bias, which Cole answered by noting that her parallel record-keeping had begun 12 months before she had any interaction with the headmaster about the specific student, which meant her documentation practice predated any possible grievance. And finally, in what Bones thought was Clearwater's most technically sophisticated move, a challenge to the evidentiary standard of Muggle clinical observation versus wizarding diagnostic verification. Cole answered the evidentiary challenge by explaining, in precise technical detail, that Muggle clinical observation documentation required physical measurement and written notation, under a professional standard of care that was governed by mandatory certification, that her measurements were included in the report with their instruments noted, that the diagnostic charm alternative produced a one-time result without a measurement record, and that any certified healer examining the student could verify her findings independently. Then she said, "The Hogwarts school charter requires that the welfare of enrolled students be the primary concern of the institution. That charter requirement is not limited to magical students. I am staff of this school. I applied the standard of care of my professional qualification to a student who came to me for treatment. My findings are documented, dated, and certifiable." She looked at Clearwater. "The question of whether my method is preferred to a diagnostic charm is a question about institutional preference. My obligation is not to the institution's preferences. It is to the student." Clearwater moved on. The tribunal found in Week 7, placement at 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey suspended pending full independent welfare assessment, and the establishment of alternative magical protection provisions to be developed in consultation between the headmaster of Hogwarts, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and the Department of Mysteries. Temporary placement to be arranged by Ministry Welfare Liaison in cooperation with Headmaster Dumbledore's recommendations. Welfare monitoring to continue for a minimum of 12 months under DMLE Case 1992 W114. It was not a full victory. The tribunal had stopped short of a formal reprimand of Dumbledore, which Bones had expected but had hoped otherwise. The blood protection had been formally weighed and had produced the outcome of alternative provisions required rather than irrelevant, which meant the tribunal had accepted Dumbledore's core argument while refusing to accept its conclusion that it justified the existing placement. This was, she thought, the correct legal finding, and she was mildly surprised the tribunal had reached it, which itself told her something about the clarity of Cole's documentation. Dumbledore would spend 60 days working with the Unspeakables on a portable anchor. He had already been in contact with them, Scrimgeour told her, apparently had ideas, apparently found the problem tractable, apparently had been thinking about it for some time. She found this more significant than anything else she had learned about him in the past 7 weeks, because it meant the portable protection was possible, and he had known it was possible, which meant the Privet Drive anchor had not been the only option available. It had been the most convenient one. She wrote this observation in her case notes and did not do anything else with it, because it was not a finding and she did not make allegations from observations. But she wrote it down. Harry Potter was moved the following Monday to a vetted wizarding household in the Midlands, whose identity was held by Diggory's office. Bones received the confirmation that the transfer had occurred and filed it under the case number. She signed the final administrative notation on Case 1992 W114 on a Thursday afternoon in December. Originating report received 16 October 1992. Source: Hogwarts staff, anonymous, internal file ref, Cole M. Inquiry opened same date under Section 14, Family Magical Protection Act 1989. Tribunal finding issued 4 December 1992. Placement suspended, alternative provisions ordered, welfare monitoring commenced. Case transferred to ongoing monitoring, DMLE Welfare Division. She signed her name. She did not send Cole a notification beyond the standard process correspondence, because the process correspondence was what Cole had asked for, and what Cole had built her documentation to produce, and sending something additional would have been about Bones's need to mark the occasion rather than Cole's need to receive it. She thought briefly about what she would say if she did send something. Arrived, as she had arrived twice before, at the conclusion that nothing sat at the correct level. Then she put the file in the closed cabinet and went back to the open cases. In the Hogwarts Hospital wing, on a Thursday morning in November, Margaret Cole collected the official medical log from the bedside table, where she left it overnight for Pomfrey's use during any emergency calls, and sat down at her desk. She had received the preliminary tribunal notification 2 days ago. Inquiry formally opened. Your originating report confirmed as foundational documentation. Testimony required WC 16 November. Details to follow. She had written back to confirm her availability. She had put the letter in the official correspondence file. She wrote the week's log entry, week of 2 November. H.J. Potter, 2nd year. Transferred to external welfare placement per DMLE Inquiry 1992 W114. No new injuries presented this week. Welfare officer contact, J. Diggory DMLE, follow-up scheduled. She dated it. She read it back. She put it in the official log, where it would sit alongside 2 years of blue forms and green forms and the routine accumulation of a school's medical life. And it would be readable by Pomfrey and by the headmaster's office and by the Board of Governors and by anyone else with legitimate access. Because that was the point. Because the official record was now the accurate one, and not the cover for something the official record did not say. She filed it. She locked both cabinets. She put the key back inside her collar. Down the east corridor, the sound of students moving between classes filled the middle distance and then thinned as the bell settled them into rooms. Someone was laughing in a register that meant they had just escaped something. The ordinary noise of a school that did not know it was different from how it had been last week, that was running on the same rails it ran on every week, that would not remember this month the way she would remember it. She went to the supply room and opened the inventory book. Dittany, restocked 14 vials verified. Calming draft 8 3 below threshold order filed. Skeel grow full. Bruise paste standard 6 sufficient. The lamp on the examination table. Replacement filament fitted Tuesday. Confirmed working. Light distribution normal. She wrote it all down in the inventory log in her clear, even hand. The same hand she had been writing in for 20 years. The count was accurate. The record was accurate. She closed the book and moved to the next item.